So in HTML, we use text to define certain elements of the website. For example, headers, images, links, etc. These are a few of the main ones. Don't need to remember them as we'll be going through them in more detail later. So the text syntax is quite simple. They usually come in pairs with the second pair having a slash in front of it. You can see some of the examples for a better idea. For example, here is the paragraph element. It starts off with a paragraph tag, then you have the content, and it ends off with another tag, the forward slash. However, some tags close themselves. For example, we have BR, which is a self-closing tag, which creates an end to an element and closes itself. Tags have attributes as well. Tag attributes are information provided about the element in the tag. So for example, here, we have a H1 element and we have given it the attribute title and the value my company. So H1 elements are headers basically. So this is a simple HTML page structure. We have your HTML text and then a head tag and then a title and your body H1, and this is where most of your content will go. So for example, your headers, your paragraphs, your forms, etc. And this is how a HTML page structure looks in your text editor. So we can now look at this in practice. So we can start off by creating a new HTML file. Let's call this index.html. So then we can open this in Visual Studio Code. And now we have this is our index.html file. So we can start by creating a simple hello world. So usually if you want to open this in a new document on your web browser, you need to go to your file. But in Visual Studio Code, you can install this extension called Open in Browser, which allows you to open any HTML file by pressing Alternate B. So now we have created this HTML file and we can open it using Alternate B. So this is how our file looks like now. So now to create a HTML page structure, we can just simply we don't need to actually type everything out, because with text editors you can often write stuff using short form. So for example, you want to create a paragraph element, you can just write P and then you have your paragraph element created for you. So in Visual Studio Code, when you want to create a HTML page structure, you can just write HTML5 and your page structure will be created for you. So for example, you want to change the title to say HTML Workshop. And then we can create a simple H1 element, say hello world. So now if you were to open this we save this and then we open this in a new text browser. This is our hello world website and this is our index.html. So this is the same as this over here. So if you were to continue, we can move on to HTML block and inline elements. So in HTML, our elements tend to be broken down into two categories. One are block elements and the other inline elements. So the way block elements work are that they always start on a new line and they take up the full width available. So for example, our H1 is a H1 hello world. H1 element is a block element. But for example, if you want to like say italize hello world by say EM, which is what we use to italize, then say world, then save this, then you reload, your H1 will become italized. So this is an inline element. So what the difference between a block element and inline element is that a block element starts on a new line, whereas an inline element does not start on a new line, but it just works where needed. So our EM here is a inline element, whereas our H1 is a block element. So now we'll be going through a few more texts. So first off, we start off with headers. So there are 6 headers ranging from H1 to H6, with H1 being the biggest and H6 being the smallest. So as you can see, our H1 element is the biggest header, whereas H6 is our smallest header. So this is our header elements. Then we also have paragraph elements. So our paragraph is defined using P, and then we can have placeholder text by using lorem, and then you press enter, and this is your placeholder text. So now we have a paragraph as well. So with the paragraph, we can play around and use a few more inline elements. So we went through italize, but we also have strong. So strong helps us bold our elements. And we also have anchor. So what anchor does is it helps us create a link. So for example, say I want this set of lines to bring me to google.com. So we will add in, so as we had explained before, we'll add in a tag attribute. So we'll say, we'll create a link here. So href will bring us to a link, and then we can say we want to go to google.com. So sorry. Yeah, so we can go to google.com, and then we save this, and now we have changed a bit. So this is our strong tag, and this is our anchor element. So with this, if you click it here, you'll bring us to google.com. But sometimes we don't want our link to bring us to the website on the same page, but we want it to open up in a new page. So what we can do is we create another attribute and call it target, and then it will be right blank, and then save. And now when we press the link, it'll bring us to the google.com, but on a different website, on a different web page, a different tab. So this is a few of the tags we've gone through. Now we can go through lists. So we have 2 kinds of lists. We have ordered and unordered lists. So unordered list is UL, and then we can add in the specific list inside our unordered list using LI. So say we have list item 1, then we create a few more, and then we save, and then we can do ordered list as well. So this is our unordered list, and this is our ordered list. So the only real difference between an unordered and ordered list is one is bullet points while one is numbered. So then we can create tables. So tables is another form of, is basically another tab, another element, and then we create using table. Then usually table you split into head and a head and a body. So T head represents the first row, and T body will represent the actual content, the data. So since in T head we only want one row, we just have one TR element, which is table row, and then we create the headers we need. So for example, we want to find a person's name, then we want the email, and say we want age. Then in the body itself, we can add, say we want 3 rows, and then we can have the data itself. So this is TD stands for table data. So say the name is Tom, then the email is tom@google@gmail.com, and then say his age is 24. Then we can do this a few more times. Then we save, and this is our table. So we have our name, this is our header, the first row, and then this is our data. So we have 3 names, 3 emails, and 3 ages. So that's how you create a table. Yeah, I know this all looks quite ugly, but that's why we'll be learning CSS later on to learn how to design stuff. Anyways, so we can now move on to say create another. So we can move on to create another set of elements, let's say forms. But before we do that, we can create let's use some of the self-closing elements that we were speaking about just now. So one of them is BR, which creates a break, and then HR creates a line, and then BR creates another break. So say if you were to save this, now you have a break, a line, and a break. So with this we have a bit of space to create a new element. So let's create a form now. So the attributes I'll write into the form element don't really matter now, since this form isn't actually going to be active. It's just a markup. So in our form, let's say we want to create a form where we want to find out the person's name and the person's email. So we can first create a division. So a division is an element which you use to define a division or section in an HTML document. So it's usually used as a container for other HTML elements. So basically, since we want to find the person's name and person's email, we'll create two divisions. In one division, we will be entering all the stuff needed to create a form where the person inputs their name, and another division where we'll create all the stuff needed for a person to input all their email info. So we will first have a label. So let's say for name. So this is basically the label for our box. And then we have an input where the person will write in their information. So here, since you want to know the person's name, we just use name. And then we can also have a placeholder tag. So this is what will be written when there's nothing inside. So here we can write input name here. And then we can create one more just for our email. Here we will have to change the type to email. So in input, there are a few types. So for the first one, I should have changed this to text. So when the input is text, you're just inputting text into the box. But when you change it to email, it will be able to check for you if the stuff the person is input is actually an email. So for example, if you don't have @gmail.com or something, then you will know that the person hasn't inputted an actual email inside. Then we can create a submit button. So for submit button, we also use input, but this time the type will change to submit. And then we can create a value. So value is what will be written on the actual button itself. So in this case, since we want a submit button, we can just create a submit. We can just call it submit. Then if you were to save and reload, this is a simple form. So you have a name, say Ukash, and then Ukash. But like say, if I just write Ukash and submit, it won't work because this input is an email type. So we have to write like say something like, and then you submit. But since this isn't an interactive form, it won't bring us anywhere. So this is the basics for the basic HTML text that I've gone through. So after this, we will go through semantic text. So semantic texts are basically the way you structure your website. So in this scenario, like say we have header, navigation, section, article, assign, footer. So we've already went through a few of this stuff, but using this, you can create a simple website with a simple structure in place. But if you want to do slightly more complicated stuff, then we will need to do CSS. So we were supposed to have a break now, but since I was a bit fast, that we can first move on to start CSS instead. So let's discuss what is CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and is used to design websites. And there are three ways to add HTML into a CSS file. So we have inline CSS, which is how you input CSS directly into the HTML element. You have internal CSS, where you use a style tag to input your CSS design into the element, or you use external CSS, which is where you create an external file and then you design your website. So before we look at all three methods in practice, we should see how we actually define our CSS in the first place. So you first use your element over here, then you add the property of the element you wish to change, then the value you want to change afterwards. I mean the value you want to give to the property afterwards. So you need to remember your colon, your semicolon at the end, and this is how you do a selector. So we can see this in practice using a set of documents I've prepared. So let's go to CSS and let's open this in Visual Studio Code. So as you can see, this is already a pre-made HTML file that I created, and then inside we have basically two elements, a H1 element and a paragraph element. So I've already done some styling, and you can see how CSS works in this case. So if I were to open this in a browser, this is how the web page looks now. So what is working now is our inline CSS. So into our H1 element, I've added a style. So this is inline CSS, and I've changed the color to purple. So therefore, you can see the H1 element's color has changed to purple. Then as for the paragraph element, I've added the background color to it, and there's a blue background color. So this is how you input in inline CSS. But say you don't want to use inline CSS, say you want to use internal CSS. What you do is you go under your head, and under your title, you add in a style tag, and then you can start targeting the specific elements that you want. So say, for example, in this case, we want to change the color of the hello world to green by using internal CSS instead. What we do here is we first create our selector. So this is our H1 selector. So we add the element we wish to change, and then the property of the element that we wish to change, and then the color. So here, since we want to change the H1 to green, we do this, and now if you reload, you save, and now our hello world has changed green. So what you might have realized is that even though both internal and inline were working at the same time, inline took precedence. So in general, if all three are in play, inline takes priority, then internal, then external. So now we've already gone through internal and inline CSS. So let's look at how we will do external CSS. So for that, first we will need to create a CSS file. So once again, create a text document, and then let's call this style.css. Then you should open this with Visual Studio Code as well. So as you can see, to first, before we do anything to the style.css file, we need to first link the style.css file to our HTML file. So the way we do it is, instead of creating a style tag underneath the head, under the head, we create a link element instead. So you create a link element, and then we explain what file we're linking the HTML file to. So in this case, it's a style sheet, and then we write the link. So since they're in the same folder, we don't really need to create a pathway to the element. Instead, we can just add in style.css, which is the name of the folder. So after this, we just need to, we can now directly start inputting CSS into this HTML file now. So say I want to change the color of H1 as I was doing before. So now I input H1, and say I want the color to be changed to, say, red. So I save this, and now the color will change to red. So these are the three ways to input color changes into a HTML file: inline, internal, and external. However, most people use external simply because using external CSS, you can use the same style sheet to design multiple different HTML files. So for example, if I were to just use internal inline CSS, well, I'll be able to design my document as well. That same design won't be applicable to other websites, especially for other HTML pages, especially for if you're to use inline CSS. What external CSS allows us to do is allows us to link our H1, our style.css to multiple HTML files. So there are multiple colors in HTML in CSS. There are multiple ways to input color in CSS. You can use color names like I did here, or you can use HTML5 color names, or hexadecimals, or RGB. So I'll be going through a few more examples later. And then there are a few web-safe fonts that we can use. So these fonts are already inputted into HTML. So you don't really need to do, as long as you were to like say H1, I go here and then say font family, you'll be able to see the web-safe fonts from the start. However, if you have a specific font that you wish to use, then you have to import them from outside. So now we move on to class and ID. So as you might realize now, the H1, so far we have been designing stuff using CSS. If like say I'm trying to design a H1 here, right? This H1 will affect every single H1 element that is in our HTML file. But say I want one of my H1 colors to be different from another H1 color. So for example, maybe I just create another hello here. So now when I save this and open it again, they are the same color, but say I want one of my hello worlds to be different color from my original hello world. So the way I can do this is by giving one of my hello worlds a class or ID. So what class and ID do is it allows us to target specific elements easily, allowing us to have more flexibility when designing a site. So for example, like say for the second one, I give it a class of say box1. Then I save. So now I can design just that specific H1 instead. So the way you design classes is by adding a dot in front and then box1. And then you enter the class name. So say now I want the color to be purple. And I save. Now we have two different H1 elements, but one of them is a different color from the other, since this one is being styled by the class, while the other one is being styled by the H1 element. So we also have IDs. So IDs and classes are quite similar in the sense that they allow us to specify which element we're targeting. But however, classes allow us to we can use the same class on multiple elements, whereas ID can only be used on a specific element. So see here now I'm using this box2 ID on this H1 element. I can't go and then create another element with the same ID, but I can create another element with the same class. So for example, I can give this paragraph here a class of box1, but I can't do that with I can't give it the ID box2 because ID is specific to one element, whereas classes can be used on multiple elements. So the way we design IDs is instead of using a dot, we use a hashtag and then just box2 and then color, and then let's say orange, then save. So now we have three different. So this is being styled by the H1 element, whereas this is being styled by our box1 class, whereas this is being styled by our box2 ID. So an element, it can be considered a box basically. So the way it goes is we have a content in the middle, and then we have a border. Then the space between the content and the border is defined by our padding, whereas the space from the border and external other elements is used. We define using margin. So we will see this in practice later on, so that it's more clear for you guys. The way we can define margin in padding is either using margin by defining which direction we wish the margin to affect. So for example, margin top 5 pixels, margin bottom 5 pixels, etc. But we can also use a shorthand and just define all sides together using a margin. So using margin, I can go top, right, bottom, left, or I can just specify to top, bottom, or left, right. Or say I want everything to be the same, I can just do margin 5 pixels, and then the margin throughout will be 5 pixels, like here. So now we can play around a bit with CSS to see how we can use it. So there's another pre-made HTML file that I have ready. So I'll open this with Visual Studio Code. So this is a pre-made HTML file that I prepared. So I'll change, I'll remove all the styles for now. So this is a HTML file that I created beforehand, and there are three components. So we have a title and a paragraph, then a set of lists, and then a form. So this looks quite ugly right now. So we can try to design this, and we will split it into three compartments. So we can try to use different skills when designing these three different components. So before we start, before we start designing the different components, we can first design the entire body. So as you might have realized, we have a body tag as well. So we can just design body directly, and then so we can design the entire body first let's change the background color of the web page. So let's say gray, and then we can make the color of the fonts be, let's say we use a hexadecimal this time, so use hashtag and then AACCFF, which is like a light blue color. And then we can change the font. So as we mentioned before, you can change fonts using font family. So we can go for like say Arial, Helvetica, and sans serif. And then we can change the font size to like say 12 pixels and font weight to say 400. But there's also, so by doing this is what our web page will look like now. But we can also do this by just using a shorthand called font. And then we can just input all our stuff here. So 400, 12 pixels, and then we can input our font family as well. So this does the same thing as above. This and this are the same. So if I were to save this and load, yeah, there's no difference because they both do the same thing. And then we can change the line height, which is a gap between sentences. So here we can change this to 1.6 EM. So EM is another unit that you'll see quite often when used in CSS, where it is relative to the font size of the element itself. So in this case, 1.6 EM is being relative to the 12 pixels. So then if you were to save this and load again, yeah, so there's more space now. So since we have sort of designed a bit of the web page itself, the body itself, we can now focus on the three compartments. So our file is split into three components, for the first part being a header, a H1 header, and a paragraph with some placeholder text. So I've used two classes in this component. One is I have called the division that everything is held in container, and I've given the box, the H1 element a class as well. And I've called it box1. So we can use these to style the first component. So let's start off by designing the entire division itself. So we're going to be styling the container class. So the way you style container, the class is using full stop at the front, and then you write dot container, and now everything will be affecting this class, this division over here. So let's say we want to create a width of say 800 maybe 600 pixels. Then I'll save and load. So this is our division now with 600 pixels. But you might realize something, that it remains 600 pixels no matter how you move the page around. So to make your web page more responsive, you can instead use percentages. So for example, if I were to change it to 80% and save, then reload. Now it's 80% in comparison to this width, but then if I were to full screen, it will change again, and it will be 80% in comparison to the width of the web page. So this helps us make our website more responsive and reactive. So now let's change the background color of our division. Let's say we can change we use another hexadecimal, say 22233, and then we create a border around it. So the way you create a border is you have three components. One is the width, which is, let's say, 5 pixels. Let's make the width 5 pixels, and then we have a font, the color of the border. So in this case, let's just keep it the same as the font tag, the color font of the text, and then the style. So we can do multiple styles, like we can have dotted or we can have none. But in this case, we can just change it to solid, and then we save. And now we have a border, and so you can see the background color in effect, and then this is a border we have around it. But say I want to centralize this division a bit. So then now we can use what we learned before in margin and padding. So first, as you can see, the words are a bit close to the sides. So to give our words more space, let's create a padding of say 5 pixels throughout. Then we save. Now as you can see, there's more words. So what padding does is it changes the space between the content and the border itself. Then we can change the margin. So what margin does is it changes the space between the border and everything else. So let's say margin, if I were to change to say 50 pixels and 100 pixels, you'll see it move around a bit. So, but that's not what we want in this case. So we can just change it to auto. So what auto does is it helps us centralize the margin to the center of the web page. So as you can see now, it's become more centralized. So this is our container. Then now we can move on. So I think our container has been our division container class has been designed quite a bit, but we still have this box one, which allows us to design our hello world inside. So what we can do is like say dot box one, and then we can change the font weight to make it thicker, say 800, and then we can change the font style. So what font style we mean is like say italics or stuff like that. So here we can just italize the whole thing, and then we can maybe change the font family as well. Maybe, yeah. So we can change so with this, our page is styled slightly differently. But now let's say I want to style my paragraph over here, but I'm for some reason I don't give it a class ID. Then how do I do this? The way you can do this is by going to, so since we already know that the paragraph is in the container class, so say container, then we can after that add in a p paragraph and then style like this. So what this will mean is that all paragraphs that are inside the container division will be styled now. So say I want to change the font weight to make it lighter or something, so like 300. So now only the paragraph will be changed. So this paragraph will be changed. Then reload. Yeah, there's not much difference, but yeah. So this is how we can design certain, like using classes and specific elements in the class itself. So I think we have done enough with the first component, so we can move on to the second component, which is designing our lists. So in case of our list, we are working with, in case of our list, we are working with one single class called categories, and then it has a H2 element and an unordered list element inside with four lists inside. So we can start off by designing the class itself. So since the class is container, which is holding the entire division, we can design this first. So let's say I want to create a border for this as well. So once again, thickness, then we can change the color, and then the style. So in this case, I'm sticking to solid. Then say I want to round the border a bit. I can use border radius, and then say 15 pixels. Then I save. So now I have a border, and as you can see, it's slightly rounded on the edges due to the border radius. But now there's no gap between our two components. So the way our two divisions. So the way we can change this is by adding in a margin. So let's say we create a margin of 10 pixels, then save. And now we have a margin here, and it's throughout. The margin is the same throughout. But let's say I want to shrink the width to make it more similar to the hello world. Then we can change the margin for left and right to change it to say 50 pixels. And now we have this is how our list looks like now. But the content inside seems quite close to the border as well. So maybe we want to have a padding as well. So let's say we create a padding of 10 pixels. And then we can have a background color as well. So we can create a background color of say, I don't know, this. So save. So this is what I'll think. Oh, it's a bit bright. Let's say we change it to like turquoise. So as you can see, we have designed the categories, but like the color isn't working, and then the links and everything still looks quite ugly. So we can move on to say the H2 element in the categories class. So let's design the H2. So we can use text align. So what text align does is it lets us align where our text is. So in this case, I want the H2 to be centered. So I can use text align center and then make it more central. And since the color isn't working very well, we can change the color to say black. Yeah, so this looks much better now. And we can also we can design the unordered list as well. Let's say I text align this as well and change it. Let's center this as well. And then we create a padding of 0. And since it's underlined, but I don't really want the links to be underlined anymore, so I can change the list style. So there are multiple ways we can change the list style. So in this place, I don't want it to really be I don't want the words to be underlined, so I can just change it to none. Oh, no, sorry. The list style doesn't change the underline. The list style changes the way we order the thing. So in this case, the bullet points are all gone. So if I were to change it to other stuff, then the bullets will change like numbers or alphabets or stuff like that. But now the anchor itself, like so, I don't really like the way the links work in CSS, like in HTML. So we have underline, it's underlined and everything. So let's say I want to change the anchor, the way anchor, the design for anchor itself in the category. So let's say I go to anchor, categories anchor. And now to remove the underline, like I was trying to do before, is actually text decoration. And then say I change the text decoration to none. Save. And then as you can see now the underline is gone. Then maybe I change the color of the text also to black again. But now it's a bit hard to tell if these are links or not because nothing happens. So let's say the best way to counter this is by when I hover over the category sign, maybe it changes color or something. So the way we can design this kind of stuff is by using something called pseudo classes. So the way you deal with pseudo classes is by having an element say anchor, then you use a colon and then explain the state you want the element to be in. So say I want to change the color of the element when I hover over the anchor or over the link itself. So then basically you do a colon hover and then you can design this. So now whenever I hover over a link, I want to make the color change to red. So then I save and I reload. As you can see now, when I hover over, this is a pseudo class in place. So whenever I hover over my link now, this will turn red. Since this is only affecting categories, it'll be a bit weird if the hover works for everything. So we can just add in dot categories, and then a pseudo class there where whenever you hover over it, you can change color. There are others possible pseudo classes as well. Say for example, when you visit the website, like when you click on it, make it change color as well. So say active. So now when I click on it, I want it to change to another color. So say green. So I save and reload. Now when I click on it, you can see change color in green. But the thing is, in this case, I have not attached it to anything. I'm just using a placeholder hashtag, so it doesn't bring us anywhere. So yeah, I think I'm mostly done with this as well. So now we can move on to form. So in form, there are two classes in play. So I've created a simple form with a name, an email, and a text area where you can write any message you want, and then a simple submit button. So there are two classes in play we can use to design this form. So we have a my form and a form group. So the my form is for the entire form, whereas the form group affects the divisions that are containing the different components of the form. For example, name, email, message, etc. So we can start by designing the main form itself. So maybe I can use the same design as the one for our list, our unordered list just now. So I just change it to my form, and I can maybe change the padding to say 20 pixels to give so that there's more space between the content and the border, and then maybe I save now. Once again, the words don't really, the blue color words don't really work with the turquoise, so maybe I can change the color to, so this is our form now. So now I can change the form group and make it such that the padding, since it's the name and the email and the messages are all touching each other, you can, let's say the padding, just the bottom, let's create a bit of space there, so 15 pixels, and save. And now there's more space here, and I want the labels to go on top of the input messages. So let's say my form. So the label is the tag for the name, email, and message, and I want it to go on, like I want to, instead of it being so a label is an inline element. That's why they are going inline with the inputs. But now I want them to act as block elements and have their own line for a whole line for themselves. So what I can do here is I can change the display and then say block and then save. Now each input has a label on top of it, but now there's a lot of space here. So maybe I want to make the name take up the full width, like the input messages take up the full width. So the way I can do this is by changing the width. So since name, email, and are the same type, they're the submit type, so they're the input type. So we could maybe change my form and say input, and then say I change the padding. Let's add a padding in 5 pixels, and then let's create a width of say 95% so that it reacts accordingly. And save. But something you realize now is that the submit button is also followed the same thing, because it's also, the submit is also an input card. It's an input and an input as well. So input element as well. So the way we can ensure that only name and email change, but not the submit button change, is by just directly targeting inputs with a certain type. So let's create square bracket and then type equals name. So what this does is that it will only target elements which have the input element, but they also have the type of name. So you save and then you reload. Now you sorry, not name, text, because the name is using a text input. So if you have to save this and then reload, now as you can see, only the name is affected, not the email and submit button. But I also want my email to change size. So you can apply the same styling to 2 different elements by adding a comma and then just input things, say email. Now you save, then you can reload, and as you can see, both name and email are changed now. But now I also want my message box to be of the same size as name and email, same width as name and email. However, it's not an input. So what we can do is we just need to see what kind of element it is. So now we know it's a text area, and then we just input, say dot my form and then text area, then save. So sometimes what it shows is that you don't really need to know what each element or tag does when you're doing the CSS or design style. You just need to know the terms and the element names, and you can just design them accordingly. So this is the form. So this is basically how you design. You can use some of the CSS skills to design certain parts of your web page. So now I think we'll take a 15-minute break. You guys can go drink water or something.